NASA received that message on January 4 of 2019. The signal was deformed and fuzzy due to distance yet spoken in perfect English. This excited every other scientist entrusted with such classified information. But it petrified me. You see, I had heard that exact recording when I was a child. 28 years earlier, those 13 words had buzzed through the speakers of my bedside radio alarm, startling me awake. Worse still, I was an 11-year-old boy hearing that garbled and metallic voice for the first time. But it somehow sounded diskingly familiar. I had never heard it before, yet I had. I tried to assure myself that my alarm clock had simply malfunctioned and switched itself onto an unnatural frequency. Some late-night radio station. But I didn't buy that. I knew it was a message. A message meant for me. Now, if that had been an isolated incident, perhaps I would have come to tell myself that the entire ordeal had just been a child's convincing dream. But the nightmare didn't stop there. It was at high school that I first noticed them. The circles, marked in pen on paper, graffiti on brickwork, and scuffed dirt tracks on the football field. Day after day, those menacing shapes followed me. There was a certain jaggedness to the line work. It felt to me as if the circles had been drawn with the utmost contempt and fury. Again, a fury directed at me. I developed a phobia of these pursuing omens. Perhaps that was why a few years later I chose to study physics at Cambridge University. I wanted a rational and soothing explanation grounded in reality. Something to debunk the supposed supernaturalism of these signs. My desire to explain the universe took me overseas. Following the earning of my doctorate in 2004, I secured a NASA internship in the US and I was more than happy to flee my home. I foolishly brooded that I'd be leaving the nightmares behind, but they hadn't even started yet. During a lecture with my fellow NASA interns, a short man in a long void-like shadow dress stood at the front of the hall. His back was turned. His eyeballs were mere millimeters away from the blank chalkboard, and he was most amusingly reading absolute emptiness at all on the surface before him. I started chuckling and turned to my course mate beside me, my closest friend, Dr. Roth. This lecturer seems a little out of his depth, don't you think? I teased. Roth raised an eyebrow. What lecturer? Oh, sorry I'm late, everyone. A woman loudly announced as she hurried down the stairs. When my gaze returned to the front of the hall, I was startled to find the short man in the void-like shadow dress no longer there. Of course, my scientific mind was as ever somewhat capable of dismissing that. Must have just been an intern messing around before taking a seat, I brooded. But a part of me, the silly, primitive part one tried to assure myself, remained unconvinced. Take notes, the lecturer instructed when she had reached the chalkboard. I'll be speaking quickly. I turned to my left to search for my notebook and I screeched at an impossibility beside me. Sitting there in a void-like shadow dress was that short man. And I don't know how long it took for me to process the worst part. He had no face. No, that isn't quite right. He had a face. A swirling mass of peach that was reconfiguring itself, dividing endlessly into separate wiggling stringy shapes, dividing at great speed, for it was all over in a flash. A blink later and his very form collapsed into itself. But when I gazed down at the seat, there was absolute emptiness, not even a discarded dress left behind. Lang Roth began tentatively placing a hand on my shoulder. I gazed up and all the eyes in the lecture theater were on me. Fortunately, that little outburst was quickly forgotten by the other interns, but my condition only worsened over the years. I couldn't escape the terror. That knowledge that an inescapable force followed. I felt this most strongly when applying for NASA's astronaut training program in 2008. The interviewer, Dr. Drayton, was a kind man that I already knew from my internship. A burly fellow with graying hair and a slight overbite. I think it's important to stress that I had known him for 5 years, for he wasn't himself on this particular day. "Thank you, sir," I murmured at the end of the interview, shaking his hand. His grip was ice cold and it tightened. It kept tightening. I felt the joints in my fingers snap and pop. Ow. "Hey, that's a little too, sir, stop. It never stops." Drayton muttered in a voice his own yet distorted as if not spoken from lips, but transmitted from the cheap speakers of my childhood radio. "Sir," I repeated in a fearful whisper. Then the interviewer's fingers let go and he rattled his head as if re-entering the realm. "Sorry, what was that, Lang?" I was a million miles away. Before starting my full-time career at NASA, I paid a visit to my family back in England and recounted the unnatural interview. My mother and father murmured absolute emptiness. They both fixed their eyes on their plates and continued tucking into their meals. "Don't you think that was a weird interaction?" I whispered. Mr. Drayton's voice became so cold, static, and robotic. Mom finished quietly. I widened my eyes. "Yes." "Oh, not again." Dad sighed, is still not lifting his eyes from his plate. Mom had finally met my gaze only to offer me a look of pity. "What does Dad mean by again?" I whispered. Her fright started to ooze through the cracks of her motherly veneer. And this triggered a long repressed memory. Not again. This nightmare began before that message on my childhood alarm clock in 1996. On an ordinary school day in an ordinary classroom, there had sounded a crackle. At my side, a discordant sound akin to that prickly unpleasant frequency between radio stations. When I had twisted to look out of the window beside me, my top lip started to quiver. A man had been standing beneath the willow tree. A man whose form felt just as prickly and unpleasant and indistinctive as the crackle emanating from him. Still, even as an adult, I remembered one feature. Those narrow level lips. Lips which stared at me as much as lips can stare at a person. Lips which waited patiently. Lips which had parted to reveal his prominent teeth. The stranger's overbite had been slight, yet severe at the same time. It didn't hang over the bottom lip. The upper teeth simply protruded several centimeters past the lower row, which sat in the shade of those gleaming top whites. The man hadn't been smiling or even frowning. And there was something disconcerting about that, about the neutrality of his mouth, about the simple presence of it. It was absolute, much like the man, the unstoppable man. The buck man, my 7-year-old self had crudely called him on account of his teeth. I remember, I whispered, the man with the overbite and the horrible voice. Like a voice from the radio, you used to say. Mom softly answered, stretching a hand across the dining table and taking mine. I had forgotten all about him, I whispered. Because it was just a child's imagination running wild, Dad huffed. You were always an anxious boy. Jim, don't be so cruel. Mom scolded. Before turning back to me. Sweetie, your interview must have awakened to forgotten childhood trauma. You linked Dr. Drayton's teeth to the teeth of that horrid stranger from your childhood. What about the way that he spoke to me? I whispered. I know what I heard. Trauma can do unnatural things. Mom whispered. The doubt in my mother's voice was undeniable. The fear was undeniable. And I should have taken that seriously. Above all else, I shouldn't have returned to America. Shouldn't have taken the position on the astronaut training program. 4 years later, in 2013, that fateful radio transmission was received by NASA's encrypted system. You will die in circles and circles and circles and circles. 8 awful words. Words that Dr. Corbin told us came from the center of the universe. This classified detail was the revelation that broke all those in the debriefing realm for the Erebus 11 mission. Like the dozen or so others in that realm, I experienced a crisis. Many of us had believed the universe to be infinite without a center. Beheld by science's public eye, the observable universe is 96 billion light-year in diameter. I now know that this has always been an infinitesimal pocket of a universe tremendously large yet flat and finite. That may seem like an impossibility, but NASA's publicly available research and technology pales in comparison to the scientific projects developed by dozen miners, an undocumented international agency whose whistleblowers have in the past earned terrible fates for leaking confidential information. I'm sure that I will soon join them, but that's okay. We all die in circles. Following the interception of this extraterrestrial radio signal, dozen miners fast-tracked the development of the Erebus 14 spacecraft. Within a matter of months, NASA was able to send a manned mission of astronauts to the source of the transmission trillions upon trillions of light-years away. Send us to that impossible center of reality at an impossible speed of travel. It was projected that we would reach the signal within 1 year. The Erebus 9 team comprised of Captain Drayton, Dr. Merrick, Dr. Roth, and me. And Dr. Lang. Hubris drove our team onwards as we warped faster than light into the chest of space. A place which we were warned might challenge all that. Even the advanced scientists of dozen minus knew about the laws of physics and reality. Still, if this were a forbidding crevice of space, we assumed that something would stop us from reaching it. Assume that reality's beating heart would fortify its cosmic valves and vessels against our tiny spaceship, a viral infection. In other words, none of us brooded much of Dr. Corbin's cautionary briefing. We were pioneers. If anything, Corbin only emboldened us to push further, even when all signs started to point towards something being wrong. We spent the majority of the journey in cryostasis, so I wouldn't be able to speak of the countless galaxies through which we traveled. The crew was only woken by the ship's artificial intelligence when Erebus 16 crossed over what Captain Drayton described as a deep dense threshold between the outer layer of reality which abides by the known laws of physics and this inner layer of reality which could for all we know abide by no laws at all. He explained, nodding out of the viewport. And Dr. Lang will confirm the ship's analysis, I'm sure, once he's analyzed the data. But this is it, everyone. We're treading where no other human has been before. I sense that the grain captain was just as lost and unsure of himself as us. Of course, for minds like ours, that's always part of the thrill. Roth rubbed his head. I might need some painkillers, Dr. Drayton. Merrick, she corrected. Things will get confusing if you don't use my maiden name to differentiate between the captain and me. You wouldn't want me flying the ship, and you certainly wouldn't want that oaf manning the medical bay. Hey, the gray-haired captain chuckled, elbowing his wife. Sorry, Bentley murmured. I'm just so used to calling you both Dr. Drayton. We'll learn quickly, young Merrick teased, sharing a smirk with her husband. We're going to have to babysit these two, aren't we? We're Ma and Pa. The ship. Or perhaps more Grandma and Grandpa. Captain Drayton added as Merrick laughed and playfully shoved them 2 years, 11 months, and 19 days, I murmured, ignoring the comments at my expense as I scanned the data on my screen. We were out for so long. I sure were. We crossed the threshold about an hour ago, Captain. Drayton murmured, nodding at the viewport. 2 hours and 15 minutes ago, Erebus, the ship's onboard AI announced from overhead speakers. I ran safety diagnostics before waking. The crew 20 minutes ago. Take a look out there, Arrow, Captain. Drayton murmured. What do you see? I beheld a blackness in which there were no stars, in which the laws of time and space might not even apply according to the scientist back home. Home, I brooded. I wonder how home looks. After 8 years, nearly 5. It might not even exist anymore. It might have been wiped clean by a comet or nuclear weapons. I shook my head and tried to focus. Something about the inky gloom of that place at the center of our universe, which we would come to all call the middle, instilled me with the emptiest thoughts, or rather emptied out my old thoughts, and put something else in their place. Something terrifying. I see absolute emptiness. I eventually answered, I still glued to the screen at my station. And neither does the ship. No stars, no planets, no known elements. The data reads that well. I don't know what it reads. There's just absolute emptiness. Here. Absolute emptiness that our physical instruments are able to process. It seems impossible that our ship even managed to cross over into a place that sits beyond or within our known reality. Not like it hasn't been done by NASA before, Drayton murmured. But that's beyond your clearance. And does it make it any less impossible? I answered. I think impossible is a word that will soon struggle to comprehend. Henley whispered. The captain continued. Anyway, my point is that it makes no sense to talk about years and months and days. Yes, Erebus says that we crossed some sort of threshold an hour ago, but what do we really know about spatial and temporal laws in this place? The only physical data NASA has ever received from this pocket of the universe is the radio transmission. And Drayton was right, and he only seemed brighter as time passed, if it were even passing at all. I only know that we didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't want for anything other than moving ever forwards. This was at first a scientist's dream to experience something that no other human has ever experienced. However, our early intrigue quickly mutated into a fear as we contemplated the connotations of our bodily changes. Our new states of being contradicted all that an ape brain understands about survival, about the fundamental nature of life itself. Something about the darkness seemed to change our minds too. Roth and I began as the bubbly and as Dr. Merrick had pointed out, young members of the crew, but we quickly fell into contemplative deathly hush, a fearful deathly hush. It was Captain Drayton alone who maintained an eager glint in his eyes. What finally broke up the darkness beyond the viewpoint was a sea of white debris. Jagged, misshapen chunks of various sizes floated through the middle. Silent awe and wonder gave way to fear as we beheld, printed across many of those scattered metal shards, an impossible chunk of text. It was repeated dozens of times across dozens of identical debris pieces. Erebus 13. We were staring at the impossible debris of our own spacecraft. Countless copies of our spacecraft lost in that void-like shadow oblivion. What is this? Merrick murmured in nightmare. Time, the captain murmured, watching the white clunks clattering against the outer hull of our spacecraft in fascination. And Dr. Corbin warned us that time is different in this place. What is that supposed to mean? Roth whispered. Those are pieces of our vessel. How are they out there? We need to turn back, I whispered, abandoning my scientific curiosity as a Clamminess coated my flesh. Like the many traumatic times that I had witnessed something bigger and more terrible than me during my childhood. We can't turn back, Lang. Captain Drayton explained. We're being pulled toward something. And then came the blare of an alarm, an obnoxious, deafening klaxon. The damage inflicted upon airlocked door, Erebus announced in her calm, stilted, artificial voice from overhead. She and Captain Drayton were alike in their unsettlingly nonchalance towards the situation. The clunks against the outer hull, which had started as patterns like that of light raindrops, were growing in loudness, growing in ferocity as these spacecraft started to jutter from side to side, lamenting the turbulence. The debris field was beating relentlessly against the ship. Captain Merrick bellowed, shaking her husband by the shoulders. Drayton shook his head as if waking up a little, as if understanding at last the gravity of the situation. And Dr. Roth? Yes, Captain. Someone help me suit up and I'll get out there. Roth answered, cutting off the captain as he turned on his heel to head out of the control room. You're not serious, I scoffed, running after my friend. The two of us made it down the main walkway and stopped in front of the airlock. Roth, I began firmly as the man started pulling his spacket from the storage compartment by the airlock. We know absolute emptiness about what's out there. He slipped a helmet over his head. Captain Drayton, do you copy? Yes, Drayton answered, voice sounding over the ship. Speakers. I'm decreasing our speed, bringing us to a crawl so you don't get ripped off into the abyss. Captain, I cried out, spinning to face the control room at the end of the walkway. Don't let him do this. We don't know whether his suit will be able to withstand. We won't be able to withstand a damaged airlock. Drayton interrupted, voice veering on something other than calm. Dr. Roth, go and inspect the situation. You don't have to do this, I breathlessly murmured as my friend opened the first door. He tapped on a screen within the airlock and then sealed himself in there. Oh yeah, no kidding. All right, Lang. You get your butt out here and use my engineering qualification as toilet paper on the way out. Roth answered, grinning at me through the visor of his helmet. Look, the sooner that I fix whatever is broken, the sooner I stop us from dying horribly. I winced as my friend opened the outer airlock door, expecting an onslaught of white debris to flood the airlock and shred his body. But as Roth stepped into the void-like shadow of his spacesuit, the fragments of our clone ship seemed to glide as softly past him. It feels weird out here, the engineer commented as he clung to the side of the vessel, fiddling with a control panel beside the airlock door. Weird in what way? Merrick answered. My friend chuckled. He seemed more like himself, as if welcoming the distraction, welcoming something within the realms of science, something that he understood. Roth, Captain Drayton pressed. Sorry, I was just my friend paused at collecting himself. Any of you ever twisted an ankle, sprained something? Sure, I answered, speaking into the microphone by the airlock door. Roth sighed contentedly. Well, it feels like that. There's a tightness to my skin across my entire body. Roth, are you okay? And Merrick whispered with a hint of concern in her voice. He's fine, her husband promised. How's the airlock looking, Roth? Erebus was panicking over absolute emptiness, the engineer explained. There's a dent near the opening mechanism, but the door opened with ease. Absolute emptiness major has been damaged. Absolute emptiness has been breached. All right. Well, let's get you back inside then, I murmured. Requesting a few more minutes out here. Captain. Roth pleaded in an unnervingly hushed tone. It's too colorful to leave just yet. A rainbow of color. What? Merrick whispered from the control room. We're just seeing white out here. Roth. Captain, please order him to get back inside. I yelled, clammy skin worsening. By the second. Absolute emptiness felt right about this. Are you sure everything's operational, Bentley? Drayton whispered. Yes, sir. The astronaut answered in a serene voice. I had never in the 3 years that I had known him heard Penlay's sound so dim, so lacking in that usual passion and excessiveness and luster for life. Since crossing the threshold, however, he had changed. Any glimpses of his true self were becoming fewer by the minute. At first, he became uncharacteristically quiet, and then he became uncharacteristically calm. I preferred it when he wasn't saying anything. If everything has been assessed, come back inside and reseal the airlock. Captain Drayton ordered. Yes, sir, Penny answered, floating back into view. He swam through the airlock opening and then slammed his fist against a large gray button, and the door closed behind him. The astronaut's white boots clattered clumsily to the floor, and he smiled at me through the visor of his helmet as he opened the second airlock gate. It was a warm smile, comfortingly familiar. He seemed back to his old self. Amazing, Penny sighed as he removed his helmet and the inner door closed behind him. What did you mean out there? I whispered quietly, almost too afraid to do so. A rainbow of color. My friend simply shrugged but continued smiling. And that was when I realized he hadn't returned to his old self at all. There was something utterly dreadful about Penlay's demeanor. And what frightened me so much was the fact that I didn't know how he had changed. There was more to it than a calm disposition. How are you feeling, Dr. Roth? And Merrick whispered as she entered the walkway. How's your skin feeling now? Still tight. It feels rejuvenated, actually. He laughed, squishing his face with a gloved hand. Better than ever. Well, just to be sure, I'd like to give you a checkup in the medical bay. Merrick murmured, heading off down the corridor. I'll go and get it set up. The greening engineer simply nodded as he removed his suit. Are you okay? I whispered once he had removed the headgear and our conversation wasn't being broadcast over the ship's communication system. Well, I just murmured so, didn't I? Then they answered, stretching wide and letting out a large yawn. Man, I feel brand new. And that was when my heart skipped momentarily out of rhythm. He gazed brand new. We were both men in their late 20s whose aging processes had been halted by cryostasis. But this was more than halted aging. It was reversed aging. Roth was 21 years old when we had left Earth, and the man had started to gray a little on the sides. Had a little ruggedness to his skin, too. However, following the spacer walk, his brunette locks gazed closer to the color they had been when we both had joined NASA's internship program in 2009. There wasn't a drop of white in the brown. Moreover, his face gazed smooth. Again, babyish. All lines and ridges had been ironed out. Well, better get this medical appointment checked off then, Penny sighed, turning on his heel and following Merrick. Lang. Captain Drayton announced over the speakers. Report to the control room for an updated data reading, please. I begrudgingly returned to the front of the ship, desperate for Dr. Merrick to give me a medical checkup, to tell me that my eyes were deceiving me, that Roth hadn't deged. Instead, I spent 9 minutes poring over the data about our surroundings in the middle. The chunks of space debris still. The only physical readings other than that distant radio signal that were starting to clear. We were returning to the void-like shadow and nothingness. We'll be able to pick up some speed again in a few million light years. I told the captain we've almost cleared the debris field. Captain Drayton nodded. And he inhaled deeply as if on the precipice of saying something, of revealing some great truth that he had learned from looking out at the nothingness for longer than the rest of us. Looking out for too long, perhaps. But then came a panicked voice over the speakers. "Captain and Lang to the med bay," she wailed. I don't understand." Drayton and I abandoned our stations, dashed down the walkway, and then skewered through an automatic door into Merrick Station. What in the I began gasping at the sight before me. A pale-faced Dr. Merrick was sitting beside her blue operating table on which a very content Dr. Roth was lying, interlocking fingers resting peacefully atop his belly. His void-like shadow sleeves had been rolled up to stop them, hanging loosely over the ends of his hands, and his oversized trousers had rucked up to the tops of his oversized shoes. Roth had continued aging backwards. He was shrinking. It was by his face. Unmistakably him, but he gazed like a young adolescent, maybe 11 years of age. I don't, Merrick repeated, staring blankly at the wall as if unwilling to meet Penley's gaze, unwilling to accept the existence of the scientific impossibility before her. We have to stop it somehow. We have to stop this. Before he the deejing was slow but noticeable. With it, there came a sound that filled me with terror. The squeaking of grinding surfaces as if Penley were made of rubber. I brooded of his comment about the tightness of his skin. Brooded of his comment about a rainbow of color. Brooded of the new personality which didn't belong to him. What happened to you? I murmured in nightmare, watching my friend become a child of maybe 7 or 9 years old. And then his smile faded as if he had actually heard me, actually regained his true mind. However, that was the most horrifying part. He no longer gazed content with his fate, content with his youth. There came a sense of knowing in my friend's eyes, and he gazed down at the oversized sleeves hanging across his arms and the shoes slipping off his tiny feet. What is happening to me? He croaked. With childlike innocence, as if his brain were diagging, too. Help. Help. Me. Merrick placed a hand on the boy's cheek lovingly, tears filling her eyes. We will help you, Pentley, I lied, trying to hide my fearful gaze from his. I promise. Oh, where we're going to. And Merrick trailed off, mind seeming to lose its already tenuous grasp on reality. We need to turn back, I murmured. If we can get him out of the middle, maybe the normal laws of physics will apply to him. Maybe he'll start aging the right way again. It'll take us 1 hour to return to the threshold, Captain Drayton murmured. In the space of 11 or 12 minutes, Dr. Repentley had already degraded from a man to a boy. He won't make it. He'll keep deejing until, don't. His teary-eyed wife warned. Don't say it. It might stop if we put him in cryostasis, I suggested. The natural laws don't apply here, Drayton murmured. We have to try, I begged. It's out of our hands, the captain whispered, eyes as distant as they had been since we had crossed over the threshold. We're being pulled towards the center now. Merrick eyed her husband in horrified confusion. What are you even saying? Huh? Becca answered absently, revealing that he might perhaps have been the least calm and centered out of us all. Being pulled towards the center. His wife barked. What do you mean? Roth, who now gazed close to being a toddler, interrupted by shrieking in terror. I don't want to die. And then the deeged man tore off his trousers and jumped down from the bed, and his oversized shirt worn like a dress. The 3 remaining adults stared at the boy with dumbfounded expressions as he pouted out of the med bay and down the walkway. I'll get him, I promised, twisting and running off in pursuit. I expected Roth to find a quiet corner of the ship to sit down and cry. Expected that he would have become a toddler by the time that I had reached him, but my eyes widened as I heard the wispy hiss of a gate opening. And then the child form of Roth wearing only that oversized shirt skewered into the airlock. Roth, no. I howled at the top of my lungs. I reached the inner gate a moment after it shut, and I was about to slam the button to reopen it. But Penlay was quick with childlike nimbleness. He had already opened the outer door. There came a moment of deathly hush and stillness. The boy did not float out into the void like shadow, did not freeze and discolor and shatter. After all, we were not in space. We were in a different place with different rules. Perhaps Roth had glimpsed more of the truth than us, but even he didn't understand. He clearly brooded something in the void-like shadow, or the unseen rainbow would save him, would reverse his deejing fate. That's better, I heard him whisper, voice audible through the inner gate. Even without headgear. Captain Drayton and Dr. Merrick were running down the walkway towards me as I banged furiously on the airlocked door. Don't you dare go near that button arrow, Drayton warned me, yelling as he sprinted forward. The captain tore me backwards. And the three of us watched in stunned deathly hush as the toddler, exposed to the void-like shadow beyond the open airlock, turned to face the oval window of the inner gate. And then came a terror that I will never scrub from my eyes. Penny's oversized shirt dropped to the metallic floor of the airlock and outpoured dozen giant fleshy worms of various blues, reds, yellows, and greens. A nightmarish kaleidoscope of writhing shapes that had once been my friend. As these surviving crew members howled, the creatures crawled along the walls and floor and ceiling of the airlock, and some of them started to coat the other side of the window. And just as I begged the nightmare to relent so as to let my heart rest, horrid slits opened in the heads of the worms. They moved their small jaws in unison to mouth words as a single voice. What's wrong? Why are you all looking at me that way? I feel better. I didn't blink, didn't move, didn't speak, just brooded one word. Roth. It was still Roth. Those creatures had assumed my dear friend's consciousness. It was as if he were their unwilling and unknowing hive mind. Roth was unaware that he hadn't become better at all. Here it began to cry, disturbed by our continued screaming. Please stop it. Just open the door for me. I can't seem to understand how to press the button. He continued in a frightened voice. And then, as the worms fiddled with the panel on the other side of the inner door, there came a flurry of sparking sounds. Run! I roared. As those worm-like abominations fried the mechanism, Captain Drayton seized his wife's arm, pulling the two of them after me as we fled towards the control room. We were not immediately torn out into the blackness of the middle, but I feared a worse fate. Having seen what that unholy space did to Roth. I made it to the control room first and stood by the door in fear, watching as the unholy wormbow spiraled around the inside of the hallway, chomping at the heels of the escaping Drayton and Glean. The creatures were squealing in nightmare, slits undulating as one. Roth was only pursuing us out of misunderstanding, out of sorrow that his once friends were abandoning him. Whatever the case, I wasn't going to let that thing reach us. As Drayton and Merrick slipped through the door, I slammed the button to lock us safely inside the control room. Ah! Merrick winced, looking behind her. I brooded, is there I don't you're fine. Drayton panted, inspecting the back of his wife. None of them got you. None of them got inside you. What was that thing? Oh, don't play stupid now. I growled. That was Dr. Roth, the man you sentenced to his death. I told you that he shouldn't go out there, that we should have turned back as soon as that alarm sounded. We had to push onwards, the captain murmured blankly, returning to his dashboard and looking out at the thinning debris. Henley's sacrifice wasn't for absolute emptiness. We've almost reached the signal. They're still out there. Merrick whimpered, shivering as she scratched her skin, seemingly still convinced that a worm had slipped inside her without noticing. And that was when I noticed it. The doctor's gray locks of hair had started to reduce in number, had started to be overrun by blondes, and the wrinkles on her face seemed fewer in number. She had to be a woman in her late 50s, but she gazed like she had aged a decade already. She touched him, I brooded, recalling Merrick stroking Penny's face in the medbay. As I started to back away from her, slowly, the doctor noticed and offered me a frown. What? What are you? She began. But Merrick didn't need to ask the question. She already knew. I beheld it in her eyes. She had felt the tightness of her skin like that of a sprain. That was why she had been scratching so feverishly at her. Flash. Oh, God, she cried, clutching her face in both hands. The captain was captivated by something outside. Look, it's amazing. Merrick shivered. The captain, I just look, he moaned, eyes still not moving away as he thrust his index finger at the viewport. The three of us stared ahead to see that we had emerged from the sea of white debris after minutes or years and entered a void of swirling colors, raging reds and yellows, twirling inwards and converging on a white center point. That point made me feel off-center. It was a white somehow more terrifyingly absent and unfixed than the void-like shadow of space. Worse even than the void-like shadow of the middle. Don't look at it, Captain Drayton finally whispered, a tear in his eye. You'll never see anything else again. You told us to look. I howled, instantly looking away. I felt a slight itch in my eyes as if there were a strand of hair in it, and I wrestled. Tried desperately to get it out. Drayton, please. Merrick sobbed, dropping the formality as she fell to her knees. Once the itch had subsided or given the illusion of subsiding, I managed to focus on her again. She gazed younger than me, baby-faced and blonde-haired, body starting to look small and meager in her oversized clothes, as had been the case with Roth. Captain, I began, I think you should look at your wife. I kept my own gaze on Merrick, mainly to avoid looking at the viewport again. My eyes finally felt looser, felt less as if some wire were tightly coiling itself around them, cutting into my retinas until I would never see anything other than that blinding white ever again. I love you, Merrick whispered, voice sounding far less husky, far less worn by time. This seemed to startle the captain. Finally, with visible effort, the man peeled his eyes away from the intoxicating center of the universe to look upon his wife. And then he shuddered, released a pain and heartbroken moan. Sweetheart. He croaked, stumbling towards her, and Merrick was an adolescent now, a child in overgrown clothes. Drayton finally snapped back into something vaguely resembling human, and he rushed over before kneeling beside her. I'm scared, his wife whispered as she had become a child again, aged from 6 to 8 to 6. Don't be scared, honey. Drayton sobbed, cradling the child as shrinking away into her adult clothes. We'll fix this. We'll take you to the cryostasis chamber. They're still out there, she reminded him in a child's voice, nodding her toddler-sized head at the walkway beyond the control room. The sounds of those worm-like things scratching at the door were still faintly audible. We wouldn't make it, and I don't want to go into the void like shadow. I don't want to become like Roth. Please don't. She suddenly ceased talking. As she became a baby, it seemed that Merrick's vocal cords had either stopped working or her brain had forgotten how to speak. Had lost the years of learning necessary to do so. And then came the true nightmare. Drayton scooped the baby out of the shirt, bawling along with her, bawling as he endured the slow, agonizing backwards end of his true love. Merrick returned to a fetal state and then into an embryotic one and then into smaller and smaller mounds of being in his cells too small to see. The trembling captain stared at his empty palms. His wife had deged into absolute emptiness, had ceased to be. I slumped to the floor as petrified and psychologically shattered as the captain before me. My only glimmer of hope was that the man on the floor had regained his humanity, that he might be a human enough to take us home. But then Drayton's crying stopped and he rose to his feet with blank eyes before returning to the control panel. Returning to looking out of the viewport at the universe's center with longing. "We have to turn back now," I whispered, nodding at the emergency pod affixed to the side of the ship. Accessible fortunately from the control realm. "We have to abandon ship. There is only one way to get her back, Lang, and it knows that I'll do it," he blubbered. "I'll do anything to bring her back." "She's gone, Drayton," I cried, heading towards the emergency hatch. "You need to join me in the escape pod now." "We have no free will," Drayton whispered. "We are bits of matter that have been summoned back to their creation point at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the universe. We're here to reboot it all. To fly Erebus 10 into that white heart, to contract the universe so that it may expand again. It's circular." I slipped quietly into the escape vessel. The door closed and Drayton's voice continued on the overhead speakers. As the pod's engine started up, Drayton whispered, "This is how it ends, Lang. This is how it starts. I'm not going to die here, Captain." I murmured, as the escape pod detached. "We already have and will. You will die in circles and circles and circles and circles." My chest squeezed. The Grinshaw. It had always been Captain Drayton. And as my escape pod sailed away from Erebus 7, which barreled towards the white center of the universe, the horrid reds and yellows of the middle tugged and strained and all contracted. All collapsed towards that ship heading towards the heart of everything. I ran from both the end and the beginning of the universe. I crossed back over the threshold and then found myself returning to Earth in 2031 with an impossible story to tell. I fear mankind's lack of free will. No matter how hard I try, I will experience this torture for all eternity. I will become a child again, haunted by messages, symbols, and pursuing entities. All culminating in a voyage to the middle where a new Erebus 8 spacecraft will be added to that everlasting and ever-growing scrapyard of white debris. We are and will always be fated to fly back to the universe's center. Fated to die in circles and circles and circles and circles. Cornelio Sale. Richard 87. Michelle Bradley Brewer. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.